Hello and welcome to this webinar all about embracing disruption in the manufacturing world. I'm Maggie Holland, I'm Editorial Director of the B2B sites at Dennis Publishing. That's Channel Pro, Cloud Pro and IT Pro, and I will be your moderator for this discussion, which is brought to you today in association with Sage. We're here for what promises to be a very engaging and interactive discussion. We'll look at the role globalisation plays, we'll look at the changing manufacturing landscape and what opportunities and challenges that brings. We'll also look at the complexity of those challenges and provide real-world insight and advice on how best to tackle them. We're here to discuss all of that and more, and we hope that it will prove interesting for you, the audience. So joining me for that discussion is Samantha Morrison and Ted Mellor from Sage, and industry expert Francis Faucett. Thank you all very much for joining me. We also want to hear from you, the audience, so please do send your questions in so that we can get them answered by our experts today. So without further ado, I'd like to briefly hand over to my experts to introduce themselves in a bit more detail. So Sam, you're a Sage X3 product manager. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about your role and what that entails, please?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Maggie. So yeah, I'm Samantha Morrison, or Sam Morrison. I'm product marketing manager here at Sage, looking after the UKI's medium segment products at this moment in time, which of course involves Sage X3 and also Sage 200, which are very specific. They have functional fits for the manufacturing industry. And in terms of what the remit involves, it's all about, being up to speed, keeping very aware of what's going on in certain industries as manufacturing, keeping up with the key trends, innovations, anything that's changing, and ensuring that the product propositions and the roadmap that we have fits the changing needs of the industry, which means, of course, creating compelling customer value propositions and going to market with these.
Great stuff. Thanks very much for that, Sam. And Ted, obviously, you're also based at Sage. I know you spend a lot of time with customers. Would you be able to just tell us a little bit about your role, please, and what that entails?
Sure, thanks. I'm responsible for manufacturing and distribution in the north of England, specifically around Sage's X3 product, which tends to lend itself more to the sort of larger size, medium to large size business, rather than traditional small business that Sage addresses with its other products. So I'm usually their first engagement with Sage around the complexities of different legislations, different sites, and handling things like multiple currencies and multiple languages. So it's usually quite a complex project, and normally takes around 6 to 9 months for them to successfully evaluate and select the solution.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ted. And last but not least, Francis, if I can pass the mic over to you to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, hi Maggie. So my name is Francis Faucett. I've got a background in technology with some of the global leading software companies. But for about 9 or 10 years, I co-owned a manufacturing company in the southwest. And we were building products, shipping them all over the world, and really seeing day to day the kind of challenges that manufacturers have. Through that organisation, I became involved with some of the business groups in our region, both at a county level and a regional level, supporting manufacturers and providing expertise for them. And I'm now working alongside some of them, helping them with their business planning, their prioritisation and so on.
That's great. Thank you very much. So thank you all very much for joining me, Francis here in the studio and Ted and Sam remotely. So your time's really valuable, so we really do appreciate you giving that time up today to chat about this topic. So we've set the scene, we've introduced the experts, and hopefully we've whetted your appetite for more information about disruption in the manufacturing industry and the challenges that may lie on the horizon. Once again, quick reminder that the experts are here, they're here to give their opinion, their insight, so we really want to take advantage of that during the discussion. So let's get started then. Sam and Ted, perhaps I could start with you. Sage recently carried out a piece of research with IDC. Are you able to share some insight from that research effort and maybe set the scene? And Ted, perhaps you can blend some real world examples from your time with customers.
Yeah, so as you said, we conducted some research with IDC. The title of that was Riding the Wave of Uncertainty and How Manufacturers Are Planning for a Brighter Future. So the research spoke to manufacturers across the UK, North America and Canada. For the purpose of today, I'll just focus on some of the UKI specific stuff. But what it did do was spoke to these companies and tried to get their feelings for whether they were planning for growth, what they thought about emerging technologies, if things like, new legislations and the likes were really impacting how they were planning for going forwards. But what it did show is that there's a really positive picture out there. So in fact, 99% of manufacturers say that they are planning for growth, which is fantastic. And when we look specifically at the UK numbers, manufacturing contributed to 11% of the UK's GVA, or gross value added, last year, which is rather significant. But also looking at export numbers, it was actually 45% contribution, and that's fantastic. It shows that, you know, there is a lot of opportunity and there's still a lot of business going into the manufacturing industry. So that was really positive. But what it also showed as well is that the government have called out that we can't rely as a country for economic growth. We can't rely on service-based industries alone for that, which I think we have been doing quite heavily in the past. And so they're now turning their attention back to industries like manufacturing, which is a perfect time and a perfect opportunity for manufacturers to go back to what they do best, which is looking at premium product knowledge, in premium products, and also kind of it's the ideal opportunity to kind of reinvent and go forwards and kind of really, you know, excel in business. Now, obviously, there's no one size fits all for manufacturers. So what one manufacturer might do to another one is completely different. But, you know, there's things like looking at how you become a digital first business. So adopting new technologies like, you know, there's the Internet of Things, there's blockchain, there's robotics, there's automation. There's so many different things that are out there for manufacturers to be able to look at and adopt to enable them to become a digital first business and really actually connect all of the systems that they have to drive like real business insight and inform businesses so that they can make better decisions. But Ted, I don't know what you think. I mean, obviously, I'm talking based on the research and the findings that I've got. But obviously, you talk to manufacturers on a regular basis. So, do you think, based on the conversations that you're having, that they sound similar to what the research is telling us?
Yeah, and I think they all see growth coming from different places. Some see it coming through innovation. Some see it coming through new markets, some on new products, and some in a general. It's a new market and it's a growing market. I think from the engagement pieces we've had with both customers directly and also through seminars like this and the one we did on innovation salary. It's clear that not every single business is quite unique in terms of how it approaches improving their efficiencies or achieving growth through becoming more efficient. I think there's too much stuff out there for people to put their finger on, and I think that leads to, you know, one of the other points of the research is that there's a lot of emerging technologies which people can take advantage of. If I was to give any advice on it, it would be do something. Don't just look at the big picture and go, wow, don't know what to do there. Just, you know, pick one of them. Pick the one that's the most appropriate for your business. If you're about innovation and speed to innovation, then you need to look at digital twinning and digitalization of platforms. If you're looking at becoming more efficient, that's all about process, people. So it's unique to every business. We did a summit last couple of weeks ago at Jaguar Land Rover. There were close to a dozen companies in the room. And we asked them how they innovated. And every single one of them was different. Not one person did the same way. And the conversation that we had was, you know, was interesting. It just showed the diversity of the talent in this country in terms of what people did. And it is in the manufacturing base, it's not in the services base. The cleverer, for me, the cleverer people are in manufacturing and they're doing things that are actually worthwhile.
No offense to service.
No, not at all, but there you go.
It's really interesting. But you're talking about that and it's all very manufacturing specific, but you're right. I mean, you know, when we look at how manufacturers can innovate and become better, it's all about that whole end-to-end process. So right from the shop floor, from the manufacturing and, you know, actually the building of stuff right through to supply chain and you know, right through to customer. And if you can get it right at the beginning and that each individual step and process right from shop floor to the customer, that's if you can get that right using whatever systems that may be, and, you know, no it's not one size fits all, as you said there. Everyone's doing everything completely different, but you will ultimately have happy customers if you get it all right and you tailor it to your individual business. And that's where I think things like, digital transformation comes in, and Industry 4.0. So, I think some people might think that these are just terms that are bandied around, but actually there is quite a lot to it. So with digital transformation, for example, you're looking at your people, your software, your hardware, and activity as well. So if you take just that one aspect alone, it's something for businesses to really think about, and how they can really transform and become more of a digital first business. So, ultimately, whatever a business chooses to adopt in terms of innovation and technological kind of change, ultimately that will result in the right end goal. And it kind of harks back to smart manufacturing as well, which I know a lot of people, again, it's a term that's bandied around quite a lot, but again, smart manufacturing is about, taking all of your disparate sources or disparate kind of tools and pieces of software and so on, and bringing them together to bring all of your data together to give you the right information in real time. And that will enable businesses and decision makers to make really fast informed decisions, in real time, because they've got the data right in front of them. Otherwise, if you've got one system that tells you one thing, you've got another one that tells you something, and then you've got another one telling you something else, then can take time to take that information and that insight, make sense of it logistically, and then put them together to go, actually, X, Y, and Z say this, so we need to do this. Bring all of that data together and become a really data-driven business. You've got that data there at the click of a button. You've got the insights. You can just make those fast decisions. Like if you fail, you want to fail fast and kind of move on from that. So that's failure. But as a business, you can really see, how you're performing, and if things aren't going right, data in real time to make the changes quickly. I think that's a really important thing to call out as well.
Absolutely, and certainly, if I talk to 40 people a month about new projects around the UK, if somebody tells me that they want to become a data-driven business, I know we're on a winner, really, in terms of there will probably be a project at some point, because they've worked out that that's how they measure themselves. The days of not integrating systems and leaving gaps or silos of information where you can't actually manage the performance and spot those outliers that you need to take care of to increase profitability or increase efficiency. Unless you're doing that and have a data-driven mentality towards this, you're never going to be as successful as somebody who is. And that's really where your competitive edge comes from sometimes. How quickly you can react to a given set of circumstances, and how you make that profitable for yourself.
Yeah, I would agree.
Excellent, thank you both very much. So I've got some follow-up questions, just based on what you were talking about. So Ted, you mentioned innovation quite a lot there. How can manufacturers both keep the lights on and really embrace that innovation and that necessary movement of change?
Well, I think firstly they have to be in a market that wants to innovate. Requires either the products are old-fashioned or they're being automated in some way, or drive efficiencies or drive better products. I think secondly, an innovation mindset within the business, particularly long-established business in some of the more manual industries, really don't ally themselves quite as well to innovation as the newer markets. People were in markets where the products move very, very quickly. So say in electronics or visual, for example. I've spoken to a couple of companies recently where their development cycle is too long, and they're working on HD products, for example, in the TV industry, already at 4K and moving into 8K, and they realise that they have to innovate more quickly than they have done previously and get products to market first. Otherwise, they'll be left behind, and somebody else will have the market share. So you need that mindset. You need the processes in place to allow you to do that. And typically they are processes to the keeping the lights on in the business type process. So the purchasing processes have to be different because you need speed. You can't afford to waste time getting through quotes for everything. You have to allow people to be innovative and work at a pace that the business doesn't normally work at. So that double mindset issue that you have to get over. To keep the lights on is typically about just becoming more efficient in the processes that you already have, integrating the data so that you can measure it. You combine those two together and you'll have a business that's successful, cost effective and efficient, but moving forward with new products in the market.
Excellent. So what will happen to those manufacturers who won't or even can't embrace that change?
I think they'll either be forced into doing it or they'll lose business because of it, because they can't react quickly enough. We've seen over the last years a massive shift in offshore manufacturing, sending stuff to China and then bringing it back. But now that's presenting problems around logistics because there's a 3-month time on most products to get them actually back into this country. And people expect an Amazon-like experience these days. Want to ring up, place an order and have the product there as quickly as possible. And that doesn't really lend, that cost-based model where you're looking at doing things as cheaply as possible doesn't really relate to that Amazon type experience where you need to have local stock, local capabilities to actually service your market. I think people who don't adapt or either do part of it in China and part of it in the UK, I think a lot of people are looking at bringing stuff back into the UK or at least into Europe to give them those capabilities and improve the speed of the supply chain. People who don't do that will, I think, become less relevant in their markets, and unless they've got some, niche piece of technology that nobody else does.
And thanks for that, Ted. And Sam, just wanted to pick up on a point that you made when you were talking about kind of the health and the contribution to a healthy economy. So when we talk about manufacturers being the engine room of a healthy economy, what exactly do we mean by that?
Yeah, so I think it kind of refers back to the point that I made earlier, that manufacturing contributed to 45% of the UK's export numbers and also 11% of GVA, gross value added, which I think is massive. They're definitely not small numbers in any way, shape or form. And I think, if you took export out of the equation in manufacturing, what does the other 55% consist of? Now, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but I can't imagine there's another industry that contributes to 45% of it alone. So it's a really big number, and it just goes to show that it's still booming, and I don't foresee that really ever changing. We rely on manufacturing, as Ted was just saying there, and it's really important, and I think we need it as an economy. And I think given what we were saying before about governments knowing that we can't rely on services-based industries so much for economic growth, we need to look at industries like manufacturing that we're getting that attention now, and I think it's a great time and a great opportunity to continue that with that growth.
Excellent. So based on the points that we've already raised, it does sound like there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot to be positive about rather than necessarily negativity. Are there any really good examples of manufacturers who have embraced that change and emerged stronger? And maybe that's one for you, Ted, in terms of the work that you've done with customers.
Sure. I think the innovation summit that you and I did, Sam, we twinned and paired with a company that's done just that. They make printing machines for currency printing, and their process of being able to digitally twin a product or a machine for a particular market has helped them enormously, and they were actually forced into it by something that happened in China a few years ago, which was the government mandated that serial numbers got printed on bills. It was something, each bill had to be unique. And so there was a massive market opportunity for them. But nobody actually, the agent was working, brilliantly out there and amassing all this interest, and then dumped 200 orders on the company, which they weren't prepared for. and had to really rally round to actually produce the products that they needed. So that twinning process of digitisation of a design and build process really helped them moving forward. But it's something we were forced into. People's mindsets, I guess, need to change around what to expect in the coming years and months ahead of them in the market, and perhaps adopting one or two of those technologies. There's plenty of help around from various bodies, from both the government's perspectives and the whole innovate structure around manufacturing, whether that's material research around advanced new materials. We've got all the stuff coming out with graphene in Manchester. There's sort of traditional engineering capabilities in the Manufacturing Technology Centre in Aston, in Coventry. There's a lot of help that manufacturers can call on to help them develop new products and process and make themselves better companies.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very much for that. We'll come back to you for more of that in a moment. But Francis, if I can turn my attention to you to get your take on anything that Sam and Ted have just mentioned there, or your own industry experience.
Yeah, and I think I'd pick up on and completely agree with some of the comments that Sam and Ted made. Manufacturers are individual. So they are a very significant part of our economy in the United Kingdom, and Sam's quoted some figures there that show how compelling that is. But they're also so very different. So a manufacturing company might be a tiny one-man band building artisan products that perhaps originally they would only sell very locally, but with the advent of an online store, they've suddenly become one of those exporters, and they're now shipping all over the world. And as has been said, they need to meet their customers' expectations for that. And you go from that right the way up to large global organisations making helicopters on an 18-month order basis, and another huge industry that we have in the UK. So the observations they've made about there just is no one size fits all. And in this very diverse industry, they're facing a range of challenges. So every time a manufacturer gets up in the morning and goes to work, it is about profitability, sustainability, meeting their customers' needs, understanding and predicting their customers' needs, looking at new markets, looking at whether export is an opportunity and are there challenges, are there new processes that need to come with that. They need to keep their workforce in great shape. They may be facing, certainly in some parts of the country, skills shortages. So I've listed, half a dozen challenges there, and I haven't talked about digitisation. So I think digitisation, smart factories, Internet of Things, all of these buzzwords, the technology industry loves its names and it loves its technology. And that's vital, and you have to put a name to something. But it kind of has to take its place in that environment. And that's a hugely challenging business environment. Unlike the services industry, the manufacturing industry has to buy stuff, process stuff, and then sell stuff. And each of those has to be done in an optimized way. So they're looking at their supply chain and how they can effectively get the raw materials or the components they need. That's an ever-changing picture. Within their own organisation, they need their workforce, their processes, their machinery, always working in an optimal way. And then they need to be building products that meet customers' needs, because then customers buy more products. And so all of that, that'd keep you awake at night. That is a tough amount of stuff to look at as a business. So looking at where digitisation fits is how do we help that? So I don't think a manufacturer wakes up and says, I'm going to become a digital manufacturer. I think they wake up thinking about all of those needs for efficiency and productivity and profitability, and then embracing digital solutions to meet that need is where they come at it. So we need to make sure they can figure out and get to the information that tells them how this array of new, exciting, but perhaps complicated looking technologies can meet those business needs of profitability and efficiency. And there's no doubt there's technology out there to help, but the challenge for the manufacturers is figuring out what technology and how it works in their organisation and what their needs are. And I've seen manufacturers embrace robotics, but they've done it in a very innovative way in a cobotics environment. So they've implemented robotics, but they of course then had to deal with the staff reaction to that, saying, oh my goodness, I'm going to be replaced by a machine. But of course they're not. What they're doing is using the robotics to deal with the repetitive tasks and keeping the people to deal with the things that people are good at, which is the decision making, looking at data and seeing if something can be changed on the process line. So what it does for the staff is it actually enhances their day-to-day job. You know, they're not doing the repetitive stuff, machines can do that, but they can do the value-added stuff. But you know, that was a very personalised adoption of that technology. So the comments that were made about no one size fits all is absolutely true, and perhaps the biggest challenge for a manufacturer is figuring out, of all this range of exciting new stuff, what's going to make the most positive impact to meet their business priorities, which are not about digitising, frankly. They're about being profitable, being sustainable, continuing to grow, looking at new opportunities, and these are tools to help them.
So based on that, Frances, and how can manufacturers effectively prioritise? Because you mentioned, you know, technology isn't necessarily their priority, innovation perhaps isn't necessarily their priority in and of itself, but obviously the products that they're creating. So how can they get started and think about where their priorities are best suited or where they lie?
I think it's a sort of servant and master thing. So I think they have to decide what their priorities are. So they need a vision, they need to know where their organisation is going, they need a plan. That is going to be driven significantly by customer needs, whether those are existing customers or new customers, whether it's markets or new markets that are opportunities. So all of that is about what exactly do we do, why are we better than somebody else, because every market is competitive. They might be cheaper, it might be higher quality, they might be faster, whatever their particular offerings are, match that to a customer need and then look at the tools to get them there. So I think the prioritisation is very clear vision by a manufacturer about what they're about, what's their expertise, what's their advantage. Then it's how do we most deliver that to the customer, and that's where tools like Internet of Things, smart factories, enable them to do that in a way that is better, that's better for them and better for their customers, and not just better for the sake of it. So it's meeting that demand.
So how can we as a country and as an industry do a better job of helping manufacturers understand the benefits of digitising and moving to smart factories and things like that? Because obviously, as we've mentioned there, they've got a lot of priorities, some of which are competing. So how can we help them?
Yeah, and I think it's a huge challenge. You know, given the figures that Sam gave, there is no doubt that this is a significant issue for the UK economy. And so the UK government wants manufacturing to thrive. Manufacturing leads to exports. That's a great thing for an economy to have. But inevitably, a government is going to give a general set of information because they can't go down to an individual manufacturer and look at their particular needs. So I think at the very highest level, we do need the government to be making sure the manufacturing community understand this technology is there. And then it needs to come down to enabling manufacturers to make the right choices for them. And so that talks about the kind of conferences that Sam and Ted have talked about, where manufacturers can go along and see information and learn more. And then eventually it will come down to innovation centres, geographically based, A very big manufacturer is going to benefit from innovation across their whole organisation, and some of that is likely outside of the UK. But within the UK, there are centres of excellence around the country, and eventually you just kind of bring it down so that a manufacturer can go and learn enough to figure out what it is for them. But ultimately, it's their responsibility. You know, the higher up that communications plan you go, the more generic the information. But to understand what they need, they have to understand what they need and work with people to help them in their factory.
So we've talked about digitisation, digital strategy, and where that perhaps fits in the priority level. But should manufacturers be telling their customers about what their strategy is?
Well, it depends what the customers want. If their customers want the cheapest, fastest product, then they probably don't care too much about how they got there. So what a manufacturer communicates to its audiences is all about what's valuable to that audience. So there is no right or wrong answer to that, because there will be industries that need to see innovation within their supply chain. And so therefore a manufacturer talking about their digital journey, showing the innovation steps they're taking, it's going to be an important message. There are other customers that frankly don't care. They just want the product that they've ordered and they want it tomorrow. And how the manufacturer gets there is not a problem at all. But I do think manufacturers need to think about other audiences. Customers are a hugely significant audience they need a great dialogue with to understand their needs. But manufacturers have other audiences they talk to. Employees may find it hugely reassuring to see their employer investing in new technology. That would be seen as a good place to be, and this is a future, provided it's done in a way that's not threatening to employees. That's a good thing. Manufacturers are raising funding from time to time, so investors, banks, those kind of stakeholders, they will see value to investment in the future and embracing this type of innovation. So I think you need to think about your audience, and your customer may or may not care, but you've got lots of other audiences, and some of those will want to hear this is an innovative manufacturer making investments.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Frances. Much appreciated. So I'd quite like to move on to more of a group discussion, if I may. So I've got a couple of questions to kick things off. So I'm going to throw them out there to the three of you and see who wants to answer. So there's obviously been a lot of change in the manufacturing industry, over the last few months, over the last few years, certainly over the last decade, from both a technology, process and innovation standpoint. What are the main changes that you have seen, and what can we expect in the next decade or so? Are we talking evolution or are we talking revolution? Who would like to go first?
Well, I personally, from my perspective, my discussions with customers, there's been a tremendous amount of change in the industry about how manufacture. So there's been this offshoring and now bringing back to onshoring of manufacturing capacity and capability. There have been changes in technology which allow people now to devolve themselves of the responsibility of hosting applications like an ERP system, for example. The companies that specialize in engineering or automotive, pharmaceutical, food and beverages, they're not IT companies. They don't generate their own electricity. They just plug things in and expect them to work. And I think that, in a way, is what a lot of the cloud computing shift is going to provide people. It's going to end up as a service, just like gas or electricity is. It's going to become commoditized in a lot of respects, and also, the complexity around the people that you need for those types of roles will also diminish. And if you have them, you can redeploy them. I'd say that over 90% of the people we talk to about projects, nobody is looking to cut people. They're all just looking to improve, and I think that's a really important thing that we need to get across the adoption of new technology. It's not about replacing people. It's about making people more efficient and utilizing their skill sets more effectively. Lifting robots so that somebody isn't off with a bad back for 3 months. Processes that are repeatable and can be done faster by machines, an operator that's skilled in programming it is a better way to do things, rather than relying on, the expertise of an individual. If they move, you have that capability. The business has to look at how it's going to maintain its effectiveness in the years to come. And traditionally, that's been down to people giving service. And we can try and simplify that for people by providing with applications and tools and automation and interfaces that allow them to do that a lot more efficiently across the business, and also take out factors like people retiring and then losing that capability and giving it to other people in the business as well. There are lots of benefits from adopting whatever technology suits, and really back to Francis's point about everybody needs to decide what they're good at, what their audience wants from them. But to do that, you need to be able to manage what you do and be able to measure it. You need to be able to understand where you're strong, where you're weak, where your costs are, where you're making money and not making money. And without systems in place, you can't really do that.
So Francis, just to pick up on a point you made then, which I think feeds into what Ted's just said, you talked about, knowing your audience and how they want to, what they need to know. So you talked about, customers are incredibly important, absolutely, to every organisation, not leastly manufacturers, but obviously employees play a really key role. And particularly when it comes to change and technological change, it can be quite scary. If you're in a manufacturing industry that's heavily reliant on manual labour and people, this new wave of technology or technologies that are coming can make you feel very uncertain about your future. So how can manufacturers best bring employees along on that journey and help them understand the positives around it rather than the negatives?
That's a great question, and that is going to that's going to be a key factor in determining whether they can implement that change successfully or not. Because if they don't bring their employees along with them on that journey, then people are reluctant to embrace something that is unfamiliar with them. That's just human nature. So manufacturers need to communicate, they need to share their vision, they need to share the reasons for the changes they're making, and demonstrate to their employees that ends up in a better place for them than it would be today. And that might be about a more profitable employer, it might be about a better working environment, it might be about all sorts of things, but understanding those benefits. And I think because of that and other factors, to your original question, this change is going to be evolutionary. There are very few scenarios where a manufacturer is starting with an empty factory and a big pot of money and he can do whatever he wants. The reality is that manufacturers are trading today and they've got to preserve today's business and they've got to move towards their vision for the future. But it's not an overnight thing. And so there are some revolutionary technologies available to them, but the adoption of those technologies, because they're coming into an existing environment, is necessarily going to be an evolutionary adoption. And to your point on the question, bringing their employees alongside them, because their customers want their product and they don't really care how it gets there. Their employees are part of getting it there, so doing that in a way that is motivational and shows a future to them is absolutely critical.
So there's a lot of certainty in the fact that change needs to happen, and we know manufacturers are trying to prioritise where they start with those changes. In terms of the IDC research, Sam, if I can come to you, obviously that was entitled Riding the Wave of Uncertainty. So were there any key elements that arose from that research which pinpoint the key commonalities and trends regarding uncertainty and how to deal with it? What is particularly keeping manufacturers from that research piece up at night?
It's a good question. I don't really know how I'm going to answer it very well, if I'm being honest with you. Because it's such a long report and there's so much information in there, so much insight. That, to be fair, the report focused a lot on the positivity rather than, okay, if you didn't do this, these are the consequences. But at the it's like Ted said before, you know, if they don't do something now, they're going to be forced to do something at some point anyway. And if you don't, you're ultimately going to get left behind. And that's not just the case for manufacturers, it's the case for anything, really. So I think manufacturers just need to have a look at, as Francis was saying before, have a look at what is right for them as a business strategically, figure out what ticks the box for their customers, and use that to you know, to really address, okay, to go forwards as a business, we need to be able to do this to achieve this. If we don't do that, then we're going to get left behind. In terms of the specifics around what would happen or the negativities around that, I'm not going to be able to answer that, unfortunately. But I think it's a case of really, you know, getting to grips with what the key business priorities are, and they can prioritize those in the right way to make sure that they address the customer's needs. And again, you know, this whole one size doesn't fit all kind of one liner that we've been using throughout this, it still sticks. So, you know, it's not, you couldn't give a business, a manufacturer, you know, a kind of a review template and say, okay, is your business doing X, Y, and Z? If not, you need to do this. You know, everybody's going to be completely individual and completely different. And so I think it's a case of just working with your key stakeholders in the business, using the external third parties, as Ted mentioned before, and just making sure that you've got the right insight from across the different people to make sure that you don't end up getting left.
Excellent. So what role does smart manufacturing play in turning some of the kind of uncertainty and negativities into positivities and opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's just more about, you know, kind of getting that data, so getting your systems talking to each other, and really becoming a data hungry and data driven business to be able to see what's going on now, have a look at your profitability, have a look at any indicators that might suggest things are going awry. And, you know, because you've got the real-time data there, and all your different systems end up talking to each other, you have the right information, and it helps you see what's going on, again, like I mentioned before, across the whole process, so right from shop floor to the supply chain and product innovation and everything as well. And so I think it's just making sure that you use that data as best as you possibly can. And again, you know, adopting other new technologies, like, you know, we said before, there's the Internet of Things, there's RPA, there's blockchain, you know. So if you're in a position to be able to adopt these to give you that further level of insight, then absolutely go forth and do that. If not, obviously just use the insight and the resources and data that are readily available to you.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm just going to open it up to a couple of audience questions now, if I may. So the first one we've got is talking about, you know, the many of the shifts that we've already talked about, both in manufacturing processes and technology, that we've already talked about during this discussion. The question is wanting to know what's been driving those changes, particularly in the context of a world where it feels like more simplicity rather than complexity is needed.
You know, we talk about all of these different technologies, Internet of Things, blockchain, you know, automation, all of these different things. I think they sound really quite daunting and intimidating. And actually, you know, you're saying that we need simplicity, or actually, if you look at some of these new technologies, they're quite daunting and seem complex. And they say, well, how am I going to get simplicity if you're just giving me more complex scenarios and situations and technologies to deal with? But Ted, I don't know if you agree with me or disagree, but I think, you know, you have to go through a bit of a short-term pain with the complexity of such new technologies or even systems to ultimately give you a long-term reward and simplicity. I think, you know, once you go through the kind of the teething pain of getting new systems in place, it can be difficult, it can be time-consuming. Definitely doesn't come without its glitches, I'm sure, but ultimately the long-term benefit is simplicity and ease. Would you agree, Ted?
Yeah, absolutely. The majority of people who come to us looking to replace existing processes and systems are usually a collection of separate systems that don't talk to each other with sticking plasters all over them. And they're the people who haven't gone through the little bit of pain to see the long-term benefit. And what they end up doing is then growing those systems to a point where they can't manage them. And it just proves too onerous to actually continue to do it that way. They've got to a breaking point. I think of a couple of recent engagements with companies where they've got a merchandising team, for example, that have huge spreadsheets, like 15 megabyte spreadsheets about the profile of the customer, what they're going to buy, what season they're in, how much product they've got on stock, what they need to make, and none of that is integrated into the rest of the business. So they have to go and ask the manufacturing team, can they complete an order? That takes a couple of days to sort of come round. And then they've got to manage the stock and the deliveries. And every day that situation is changing. They think, looking at what we're doing with them, that they can sort of free up half of each of these merchandisers' time to actually concentrate on getting better pricing for raw materials, rather than the mundane tasks of actually processing their information. They've gone through this sticking plaster environment where, we'll create a spreadsheet for that. We'll not actually address the problem by, getting a solution that can help. They'll do it all in a spreadsheet. And then those things grow out of all proportion and become unmanageable. And they just get to a point where they have to stop and start again and rethink the whole solution. So that is absolutely predominant. And then there are people who've looked at it strategically about where they want to go with their business, and simple things like moving. I know it's a large expense to do so, but one company moved factories so that they could actually demonstrate products to customers because they didn't have a space to do that. And that's brought a huge influx of new customers into the business. They've also used smart products to actually monitor machines that they sell. So they're an equipment manufacturer. That's generated more spares revenue for them. That's allowed them to provide better service to the customer because they can see when components start to fail. So you take those two opposing strategies around, we'll just fix a little bit, and you get to a point where you can't cope anymore, versus somebody who's forward thinking, uses some of the digital tools that they've got for machine monitoring and so on, and actually grows revenue and increases their customer base because of it. A lot of it is about attitude and how you approach these things.
So talking of approach then, we've all kind of universally agreed that there's no such thing as a typical manufacturer, and there's definitely no one-size-fits-all solution to many of these problems. So with that in mind then, Ted, obviously you're out there speaking to manufacturers all the time. How can they be sure that they are working with the right partners and that they're on the right path to these changes that need to be made?
It's a very difficult process, and that's why a lot of the projects that we work on, there are usually 5 or 6 competitors trying to do the same thing. So people go out to market with their ideas about what they want to try and change in the business, and they will talk to between 5 and 10 suppliers like Sage to try and understand what the best fit is. So I think that they're going through a process. When they eventually select a product, whether it's Sage or something else, they're actually going through a process to understand what the market is doing and how that might fit their strategy moving forward. So I think people are actually doing it, but it's a difficult process to go through because it's something that they do once every 10, 15 years, that they're not skilled in it because they don't do it very often. And it's often, depending on what they want, sometimes it's a race to the bottom in terms of price. Other times there are other complexities that come into play around, functionality that the business requires that will allow them to meet their strategies moving forward. And, one of the things we are seeing is this, I guess, for want of a better word, the servitization of product, where they're using devices to actually monitor equipment and give them, they're becoming a data-driven business by actually monitoring the installed base and looking at component failures and how can we best improve this area of a machine, or make sure we've got enough spares in stock so that we keep people running. And it is 2 completely diverse strategies.
Excellent, thank you, Ted. So this all sounds very problematic and very expensive. And Francis, you mentioned earlier on that it's very much evolution rather than revolution. There is not a single manufacturer around today, so they might exist tomorrow, but they're definitely not around today, that has an empty kind of building and an endless pot of money. So you know, I've heard the term, you know, sort of manufacturing on a shoestring. I know we've had discussions about this previously as well. Can you maybe expand a bit more about that?
Yeah, let me elaborate on that, because actually I'm sitting here reflecting and thinking, gosh, it sounds really tough, doesn't it? You know, this is complex technology that is not to the core strengths of the manufacturers, yet it might be imperative to them achieving their objectives around efficiency or profitability or whatever. But actually there are, you know, technology innovation offers phenomenal opportunities. So manufacturers do need to go and learn about those opportunities and whether they're pertinent to their organisation. And it may be tempting for them to look back and say, well, you know, that's for the big guys. We haven't got £20,000 to invest in. But I'm seeing some initiatives in the region that I'm in the southwest, but I'm sure they're taking place all over the country, where business organisations are putting together events, educational opportunities on that title of smart manufacturing on a shoestring, because what they're trying to illustrate is that even a small manufacturer with existing equipment and existing operations and processes can add some technology into that mix for a few £1,000s, not for huge sums of money. And then they're starting on that journey and they're starting to get some of the benefits. And if those can optimise a critical process that's in their manufacturing routine on a daily basis, that could have a dramatic increase in efficiency for not a huge investment relative to the return. So I think we do need to make sure everybody understands this is accessible. So that initiative around this concept of digitisation on a shoestring is great, because then smaller manufacturers or manufacturers with not a lot of money to spend can go and see, yeah, do you know, we can be part of this evolution along with the bigger companies.
So it's absolutely okay and right to think big, but you can start small.
Absolutely, absolutely. And perhaps you should start small, and then as you prove the success and see the benefit and see the returns, then you can go big, even for a big manufacturer.
So I guess, you know, in response to one of the questions we've had about what you'd say to manufacturers whose biggest challenge is even knowing where to start, maybe that kind of responds to that.
Yeah, you know, go and learn. There are business groups, there are national and regional manufacturing bodies, and they have got a wealth of information. And just go and start. Just go to an event, just download some materials from a website, just look at the type of potential that's there. If you participate in manufacturing groups, you can probably visit manufacturers who've done some kind of automation, some kind of digitisation, and just go and learn, and then go and learn about what's going to work for you.
Excellent, thank you. So I've got a question, I think this one's probably aimed at you, Sam. Talks about the fact that given IDC is predicting that 40% of manufacturers will have enterprise-wide digital transformation plans in place by 2021, what will happen to the other 60%, you know, the majority?
Probably similar response to the previous question. If they will probably at some point be forced to adopt at some point anyway, just slower than others. Otherwise, you know, if they're wanting to adopt more kind of data-rich data insights and be able to make decisions based on data, they're not going to be able to do that if they don't adopt these systems. So it depends as well, though, because if it's a small size manufacturer, they're not going to have to do anything at any great speed, because they might already have sufficient systems in place which allow them to operate and gives them the insight that they need. Whereas larger scale manufacturers may need to adopt more quickly, because they have larger operations, might have, you know, operations in different countries, and they'll have disparate systems. So actually, to embrace that change and go forward, so how are they going to bring all of that data and insight together to be able to have that central source of information?
Excellent, thank you. And another question for you, Sam. Can you tell us a bit more about the factory of the future? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's just another reference to smart manufacturing, I think. In a nutshell, if you want to become a factory of the future, you need to look at adopting smart manufacturing. So that's about, you know, changing the way you do things, reinvention, you know, and if you don't reinvent, you ultimately will get left behind at some point, because, you know, competition is fierce across all industries, and manufacturing is no exception. So, you know, if you've got businesses doing the same as you, but they are adopting new technologies and really going forward and being really innovative, then they're going to have the information to hand to be able to make quicker decisions, to be able to change tact and strategy much more quicker than somebody who hasn't become a factory of the future and adopting smart manufacturing. So it's about giving you that competitive edge. If you stay stagnant, then you're not going to be able to move at pace the way some other manufacturers would be. So
excellent, thanks, Sam. Now I've got a question that's got your name all over it, Frances. Whose responsibility is it for helping manufacturers to become aware of, keep pace with, and maybe even move even further forwards in an ever-changing and complex world? Is it all on them? Should the government be doing more of a role? Should the vendor ecosystem and the wider industry be helping more? What's your take on that?
Yes. It's the manufacturer's responsibility. At the end of the day, the manufacturer needs to control their own destiny when it comes to their growth, their success, their profitability, and so on. So in terms of whose responsibility is responsibility of the manufacturer. Who's got a vested interest in that? Then I think the other parties you mentioned, it is a significant part of the British economy, so the government has a role to play, but it can only play a general role because it can't get down to individual needs. So it can make sure general information is available and encourage manufacturers to engage and find out what works for them. And then I think that works its way through the ecosystem, through manufacturing, national manufacturing groups, local manufacturing groups, and the vendors that are providing information. So they've all got a part to play, but at the end of the day, it's down to the individual manufacturer.
And obviously you've been in the manufacturing industry yourself as a manufacturer. Yeah. Like other industries, are manufacturers quite good at talking to each other and sharing experience and sharing problems as well?
They are actually, and actually they're better at that than some industries, because they will, and that's why local, whether it's in your own town or even in your own business park or regionally or nationally, there are manufacturing bodies, and they will do, and they are very. The manufacturers I've met will open their factories up to others in their area to show them what they've done, because they have shared challenges and there are many opportunities for them to come together and collaborate to try and fix some of those challenges. And certainly speaking as a manufacturing group for the whole of, for example, the southwest of England is much more powerful than speaking individually to your local enterprise partnership and up to government, and they do actually, and more so than a lot of other industries. So that's a hugely positive sign for us.
Mm-hmm. Would you, Ted, would you echo that? Obviously you spend a lot of time speaking to customers, you've been to many events where there's multiple customers. Would you agree with Frances that perhaps this is where the manufacturing industry is actually more advanced than others, where they do communicate, they come together to share experiences, problems and challenges?
Absolutely. It's especially when you talk around the subject of innovation of new products and new process, you'd think that people would want to keep that close to their chest. That's their secret sauce. But the amount of collaboration that goes on between people is really breathtaking. The events I've been to, the bodies that Sage belongs to. If we look at the northeast for the process industry, for example, in chemicals and pharmaceuticals, they have their own cluster with regular meetings, events, exhibitions, showcases, and it's all about discussion about how we're going to face these challenges together. If we look at the innovation summits, it's how have you done it? Can we come and see you? Can you share your experience with us? And because even though some of them are related, they still engage with people and still allow them to benefit from their experience. And I think that's one thing that manufacturing does very, very well in this country. That collaborative approach, everybody seems to want to help each other along. So yeah, I find it breathtaking, the amount of sharing and engagement that goes on between competitive businesses.
So it's a big thumbs up there for the manufacturing industry, that they're kind of leading the charge really in talking to each other, which I think is, one step on solving collective and individual problems, isn't it? So if I may pose this final audience question to all of you and see your various, or hear rather, your various takes on it. What role does ERP play in all of this? We've talked about, smart manufacturing, the factory of the future, the need to digitise, the need to optimise, the need to prioritise, and all of those things. So what role does ERP play? Is it in and of itself the solution, or is it just one part of the puzzle? So Sam, maybe if I could start with you on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely not the one and only solution that businesses need, but it does tick, a big box. It's just a piece of the puzzle. But I think, when you look at ERP for manufacturers, you get your kind of core financial report within there, and then you've got your different legislations for different countries. If you're a global organization, you have your different currencies, your different languages, and so on, and that's kind of like some of the core basics. But then you might have third-party ISVs that you use for many different functionalities, and so that they come into that as well, and you can get the data from across those to give you some really insightful business intelligence, and that can help you go forwards. But I think it's definitely, I wouldn't say it's the one and only solution that businesses need, but I think if it's something that budget will stretch to, then it's definitely something that manufacturers should invest in. And if you look at a cloud ERP, for example, it's very secure, and it's really quick to implement in comparison to some of the more typical on-premise solutions. You get quicker buy-in from people across the business because it's easier to use. IT are on board because of, again, some of the IT security stuff. And, you can get some of these, our platform is hosted on AWS, Amazon, for example, which is, it's known for security. It's a really stable platform. And so you have that security when you invest in these solutions. Ted, would you agree or disagree?
Certainly from a security, a disaster recovery perspective, as well as availability of the application, that's really what hosted or cloud solutions are all about. And that's why we're building our cloud in AWS. A company would never implement the security appliances and protocols that we have to on because we're supporting hundreds of customers across the platform. They would never invest in that themselves. So they can take, that's a benefit for them in that they're protected. From an availability perspective, we're talking about 99.5% uptime. I doubt whether anybody gets that on their own internal systems, plus all the patching and everything else that needs to go on. There are definite benefits moving into that environment, and it should really be the core or the start of something. A lot of information gets put into an ERP system. What people aren't very good at is comparing different elements to each other and looking for signals in the business that mean they should perform one function or another. So things like looking at your stock holding and trying to reduce that. Or looking at the manufacturing costs of a product that you thought you had, but your costs are actually that plus 20%, which eliminates your profitability. So the data needs to be collected somewhere in a place that everybody can access and everybody can make comparisons on. And that's traditionally an ERP system. So unless you've got one, it's going to be very difficult to do that. I'd say it was probably the engine of the business in a lot of respects. There are different engines available, and you choose the one that best suits you. But I think it's absolutely vital for any manufacturing business to have something like that in place.
Excellent, thank you, Ted and Sam. And Francis, if I may throw that question open to you then. So is our ERP the hero of the piece, or is it just one part of a wider strategy that needs buy-in from a wide variety of stakeholders?
It's definitely the latter. It's definitely part of a strategy, but I think it might be one of the most important components. So if you look at a typical manufacturer, most businesses, no matter what their size, will have email, they'll have office automation with word processing and spreadsheets, and they've probably got a website. They're either outsourcing their accounts or they've automated their accounts, and that's kind of normal, baseline. When you look at the manufacturing sector, I would say the next step, the single most important next step is ERP. So it's a really, really critical component. And if you think of what it stands for, it's about enterprise resource planning. Manufacturing is all about resources. It's about components or raw materials coming in, machines or people transforming those in some way, and then sending it out. And that's it. And so the tool that enables you to plan those resources as effectively as possible is going to be a strategic tool for your business. So it is only a tool. You've still got to understand all of the other stuff and the business priorities, but it's probably one of the most significant ones. And then if I can develop that answer a bit more, we're talking about the opportunity that cloud technology provides. That's a whole different question. You can have ERP in the cloud, you can have ERP in a file server in your own building. So the choice of ERP is not about where it sits. The choice is embrace that technology because it will make your business better. So ERP is important. Whether it's in the cloud or not, I think the cloud is a huge opportunity for manufacturers because, as Ted said, even a small manufacturer is going to get true enterprise reliability, security and management, so they're not doing it themselves. So a cloud solution and the move in that direction is hugely advantageous to many, many businesses, but those are two different decisions. And to answer your original question, ERP is a tool, but it's probably the first and most important that a manufacturer needs to look at and embrace.
Excellent. Well, I'm afraid we're almost out of time. It's been a really, really fascinating discussion so far. So just to pick up on a few key points, just as my own takeaways from the audience, before I pass them over to you. So there's absolutely a need to be data-driven. There's a need to be transparent to your various audiences. So whether that's customers, whether that's employees, whether that's other stakeholders in the business. Manufacturing should be very proud of the fact that as an industry, they are very good at talking and sharing problems and working together on them. And absolutely keeping doing that, they together collectively can continue to ride the wave of uncertainty successfully. So if I can take it each in turn for you to give your 3 key takeaways or key takeaway before we bring the discussion to a close. Sam, if I could start with you, what would your key takeaways be for the audience?
Yeah, I think the first one is probably that there isn't one size that fits all here. So, scalability and adapting to uncertainty in the industry is going to be, reviewed on a case-by-case basis here, and every business and every manufacturer will adapt differently. I think another one is that data is really important here. So the better a business can integrate all of the data systems and kind of use that to help make better informed business decisions, the better. And I think the other one here, which Francis just goes off what you've just said there, is that, I said in the previous question there that ERP definitely isn't the only solution that, or the only tool that a company needs. And that's true, but, it's definitely one of the more critical ones. It's part of a puzzle, as I said before, but probably one of the bigger parts. And, to get your resource planning, as you said there before as well, Francis, to get your resource planning right, it's one of the first and foremost parts of succeeding as a manufacturer. So I would say they're probably the things that I've taken away from this.
That was great. Thanks, Sam. Ted, if I can ask you to give your key takeaways now, please. Thank you.
Sure. I'd just like to mirror what both Francis and Sam came up with, which was this isn't the most important thing in the world, but it's certainly a large part of it. You need to, I keep using the phrase, but you can't manage what you don't measure. And in order to be more competitive or to catch up with your competitors, you've got to be able to manage that data. Data is so key and important, and so often it's either a sticking plaster or a separate silo of data that can't be integrated. And that's generally what people are looking for when they're trying to, they realize they're short of information and trying to find a solution that provides all that for them. I think the collaboration and innovation side of things is also important. I like the piece that Francis did on identity of a manufacturer. Certainly, understanding why you are who you are to your customers and then working on that. I think that's key, and that's that should be part of everybody's strategy, I think, to understand how they can improve in that area. So those are my key takeaways.
Thank you very much, Ted, much appreciated. So Francis, if I could turn that question to you and get your key takeaways, please.
So manufacturers are many and varied. So this concept of there is no one solution that fits everybody is really important. They are extremely successful manufacturers, extremely resilient, extremely robust, working really hard to make their businesses successful. And they need to do that. The second thing is they have to understand their goals and aspirations. Any solution, any approach is going to take you to somewhere if you haven't decided where to go. So I would say that they must get their business priorities understood and see where they're going. And then once they understand that and they have the context for that, look at these innovative solutions that are coming from technology and see if it can help them on their journey and embrace it and adopt it so that they get there faster.
Excellent, thank you so much. So thank you, Francis, for joining me in the studio, and thank you, Sam and Ted, for joining me as well for the discussion all about embracing disruption in the manufacturing world. I'm afraid we are now out of time, but really, really enjoyed the discussion. We could probably talk for a lot longer. And thank you very much for joining us, the audience.